If you did everything right, worked hard, won, built a life, and still feel a void you can't explain, this video is for you. Today, you'll understand why successful men feel empty and what Solomon and Jeff Bezos reveal about it. You wake up early. You meet deadlines, you solve problems, you deliver results, bills are paid, work moves forward, your family depends on you. On the outside, everything seems to work. And yet, at some point in the day, usually when the noise fades, a strange feeling appears. It's not clear sadness, it's not failure, it's a quiet emptiness, hard to explain, impossible to ignore. Many men try to push that feeling away with more movement, more work, more goals, more stimulation. It works for a while, then the emptiness returns, polite, persistent. It shows up in the silence of the car late at night, or in that moment when you realize you just cleared another milestone and felt nothing special. Maybe you've thought, this doesn't make sense. I did everything right. You studied, worked, took responsibility, avoided obvious mistakes. And that's exactly what makes the emptiness so confusing. It doesn't come as punishment for bad choices. It shows up when external life is organized, but inner life was postponed. American psychologist William James observed that the quality of our lives depends on what we give our attention to. When all attention is consumed by tasks, results, and external problems, something inside us begins to narrow, not out of weakness, but from lack of space. The mind learns to function non-stop, but forgets how to be present. Human development shows that this moment isn't a sign of collapse, it's a sign of transition. Psychologist Erik Erikson described how, in adulthood, many men enter a silent crisis. They keep producing, but begin to ask why. When that question is pushed aside, constant irritability, unexplained fatigue, and the feeling of living on autopilot begin to surface. This emptiness doesn't shout. It doesn't ask you to abandon your achievements or reject what you've built. It points to something more specific, a lack of integration. Achievement isn't the problem. The problem begins when outer growth advances without inner growth keeping pace. When that happens, a quiet rupture forms between who you are on the outside and who you feel you are on the inside. If this kind of reflection helps you bring order inside, stay with me until the end. And if this feels like a space that speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. Here, the focus is men's development. No shortcuts, no canned phrases, no empty promises. Before we go further, it's important to understand something essential. This discomfort, this emptiness, isn't unique to you, and it's not a sign of ingratitude or weakness. Men, across different eras, have reached this same point. Many kept conquering, building, and advancing, and that isn't wrong. The mistake appears when progress comes with fragmentation, when success demands an internal price that goes unrecognized and uncared for. Other men sense this tension, not as failure, but as a warning, and learn to reorganize their lives without destroying what they had built. Human history is full of both outcomes. It's the difference between stacking victories and sustaining a life with meaning. That distinction is where this reflection begins. Solomon enters history as a man who received everything very early. He inherited an organized kingdom, wealth, political stability, and prestige. Contrary to popular belief, his greatest challenge wasn't conquest, it was governance. Governing people, decisions, and above all, himself. Historian Gershon Galil, analyzing the context of ancient Israel, describes Solomon as a leader embedded in a complex system, surrounded by internal and external pressures that required more than strength or charisma. When Solomon asks for wisdom, he isn't asking for abstract intelligence or magical formulas. He asks for discernment, the ability to listen, weigh consequences, and choose with clarity. Walter Brueggemann, an American scholar of biblical literature, explains that wisdom in this context is practical. It organizes real life. It's the art of keeping the heart governed as power grows. Michael V. Fox, studying the Book of Proverbs, shows that the wisdom described there doesn't promise a pain-free life, but coherence. It teaches that every choice creates consequences, and that the wise man doesn't evade that responsibility. Self-control, in this sense, isn't repression. It's alignment between desire, action, and limit. Classical philosophy called this phronesis. Aristotle used the term to describe practical wisdom, wisdom that doesn't live in books, but in everyday decisions. It's not about knowing a lot. It's about choosing well. For Aristotle, virtue is neither excess nor denial. It's balance sustained over time. Solomon represents exactly this point. He already had power, resources, and recognition. What he perceived, earlier than many, is that growing outward without growing inward creates instability. A man can expand his kingdom and at the same time lose governance over himself. That's why wisdom appears as the axis, not as moralism, but as an inner structure capable of bearing the weight of achievement. This vision sharply contrasts with the modern idea that optimizing processes is enough to fix life. Solomon shows that the problem is rarely a lack of capability. It's the absence of inner order. When desires aren't governed, success stops being a blessing and becomes constant pressure. Before moving on, it's crucial to anchor this point. Solomon isn't presented here as an unreachable ideal, but as a human warning. He understood early what many men realize too late. Conquering requires strength. Sustaining requires wisdom. That simple difference completely changes how a life is built. This understanding sets the stage for the central contrast of this text. Between total efficiency and the human need for inner governance, there is constant tension. Ignoring that tension doesn't destroy success overnight, but it slowly corrodes it. Solomon saw that prosperity without an axis turns freedom into weight. That ancient insight helps explain why, today, so many strong men keep advancing, yet feel that something essential was left behind. This point bridges past and present and opens the way for the modern man to reflect on himself with greater clarity. Part 3. Jeff Bezos. When everything works, but the man doesn't. Jeff Bezos became a symbol of modern success built on logic. Everything in his trajectory points to efficiency, calculation, and optimization. Clear systems, measurable goals, data-driven decisions. The empire grows because the method works. The world comes to depend on that functioning. The problem is that while the system keeps improving, the man who sustains it begins to experience wear that doesn't show up in reports. The logic of efficiency makes a seductive promise. If everything is organized, nothing will be missing. Well-defined processes reduce errors. Clear routines eliminate uncertainty. Consistent results create security. That promise works for companies, markets, and operations, but it reaches a limit when applied non-stop to human life. A man is not just a system. He feels, gets tired, and needs to integrate what he does with who he is. American researcher Cal Newport observes that deep work without boundaries turns focus into exhaustion. The issue isn't intensity, it's not knowing when to shut off. When all mental energy is consumed by continuous performance, inner silence disappears. The man remains productive, but loses the ability to rest on the inside. Jonathan Crary, studying late capitalism, highlights another point: the gradual elimination of rest. Time, once divided between action and pause, becomes almost entirely occupied by stimuli, demands, and responses. Even sleep, the last non-productive space, starts to be treated as an obstacle. In this environment, the body keeps functioning, but the mind enters a state of permanent alert. Jeff Bezos represents this limit, not as a personal judgment, but as a symbol of a model. The system works, deliveries arrive, numbers grow, and still the logic that sustains it demands constant presence, continuous vigilance, and uninterrupted decision-making. The cost doesn't appear immediately. It accumulates, first as mild fatigue, then as irritability, and later as emptiness. When winning becomes routine, the pleasure of achievement dissolves. The man keeps moving forward because he knows how to move, not because he feels direction. Victory stops being celebration and becomes obligation. At that point, something essential is lost, the feeling of inhabiting one's own life rather than merely managing it. The common mistake is believing this discomfort signals a lack of ability or gratitude. It doesn't. It points to a silent misalignment. The system demands more from the man than he can emotionally integrate. Success continues, but the inner axis weakens. This contrast isn't unique to Bezos. He simply makes visible what many men experience on a smaller scale. When everything works on the outside but something fails on the inside, it isn't the end of the journey. It's a signal, a call to understand that efficiency sustains systems, but only wisdom sustains an entire life. The emptiness many men feel after victory doesn't come out of nowhere. It grows from a hard-to-see mistake because it's been normalized. Gradually, performance stops being a means and becomes identity. Producing, reacting, responding, and delivering turn into measures of personal worth. When that happens, the man doesn't realize he traded meaning for constant motion. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han observes that modern society no longer exploits the individual only from the outside. It trains him to exploit himself. The man pushes himself non-stop, believing this is virtue. Rest triggers guilt. Silence triggers anxiety. Stopping feels dangerous. Fatigue stops being a warning and becomes proof of commitment. Herbert Marcuse called this the formation of the one-dimensional man. A man reduced to the function he performs, the utility he delivers, the performance he maintains. Other dimensions of life don't disappear at once, but they become compressed. Emotions are postponed. Reflection is deferred. Relationships turn transactional. Critical thought gives way to efficient repetition. In this context, performance works like anesthesia. As long as the man stays busy, he doesn't feel. As long as he reacts, he doesn't reflect. As long as he runs, he doesn't listen. The problem is that anesthesia doesn't heal. It only delays the encounter with what needs to be integrated. When the pace slows, even briefly, the emptiness returns with greater force. Jonathan Crary expands this diagnosis by showing how time itself has been colonized. The logic of non-stop operation eliminates real pauses. Day spills into night. Rest is invaded by screens. The mind stays on standby. The body may slow down, but the thinking doesn't. This creates a deep exhaustion, hard to explain and even harder to treat. The man then begins to feel irritability without a clear cause. Small frustrations feel oversized. Pleasure diminishes. Patience shortens. Not because he's weak, but because he's overloaded inside. When meaning doesn't keep pace with performance, a silent split forms between what one does and what one lives. This mistake is invisible because it's rewarded. Society applauds the productive man. It values those who never stop. It rewards those who deliver more. Little is said about the internal cost of this logic. Little is taught about emotional integration, silence, and limits. The result is a man who functions on the outside and is fragmented on the inside. In this context, emptiness is not a moral failure or a lack of gratitude. It is a sign that something essential has been left behind. Performance sustains results, but it does not sustain meaning. When a man realizes this, he usually tries to fix it by pushing harder, when what's missing is not intensity but direction. Understanding this mistake changes everything. The problem is not producing, winning, or growing. The problem begins when these actions take up all the space of a man's inner life. Without meaning, performance becomes a burden. Without pause, success turns into pressure. Recognizing this does not weaken a man. On the contrary, it gives him the chance to reorganize his own life before emptiness turns into rupture. This recognition opens space for a realistic change. It is not about abandoning responsibilities or rejecting ambition. It is about reclaiming inner governance. When a man learns to pause, name limits, and listen to his own fatigue, strength stops being reactive. Success remains, but it begins to serve life. This adjustment does not happen all at once. It begins with awareness and is strengthened through daily practice, patient, steady, without haste, without spectacle, without guilt, and with consistency. When emptiness appears, the most common reaction is to treat it as a problem to be eliminated, something to silence, suppress, or overcome quickly. But that interpretation usually makes things worse. Most of the time, emptiness does not arise to destroy what has been built. It arises to reorganize it. It signals that a man has grown faster in some areas than in others. Seneca said there is no favorable wind for those who do not know where they are going. The modern man knows how to move forward, but often does not know how to integrate. He accumulates responsibilities, achievements, and roles, but does not organize what all of this means inside him. Emptiness is the space where this question begins to form. Who am I becoming while I do all of this? Aristotle called phronesis the practical wisdom that governs real life. It is not theory or beautiful speeches. It is the ability to act well while considering consequences, limits, and the people involved. This kind of wisdom does not appear when everything is easy. It emerges when the weight increases. Emptiness is one of those weights. It forces a man to look beyond performance and realize that strength without direction becomes exhaustion. Solomon understood this early on. When he asked for wisdom, he was not seeking advantage over others, but inner governance. He knew that decisions do not affect only the one who makes them. They affect families, relationships, entire communities. A man who is disorganized inside can cause damage even with good intentions. That is why self-governance is not a selfish act. It is responsibility. Here lies a central point for the man of the 21st century. No one is built alone. Identity is not formed in isolation. It is shaped through contact. Parents, a wife, children, siblings, friends, grandparents, uncles, co-workers, all of them are constant mirrors. The way a man reacts, speaks, listens, and withdraws in these interactions, or in the absence of them, shapes not only his own life, but the environment around him. When a man lives fragmented, that fragmentation spreads. Irritation reaches the home. Emotional absence affects those who live with him. Unchosen silence turns into distance. On the other hand, when a man begins to integrate, the effect also expands. Presence creates safety, limits create trust, consistency creates stability. Being responsible toward oneself does not mean retreating into constant introspection. It means aligning what is lived inside with what is delivered outside. A man who governs himself better reacts less impulsively, listens more attentively, and decides with greater clarity. This benefits everyone around him, even when it is not immediately noticed. Emptiness, then, stops being merely a personal discomfort and becomes an ethical call. It asks, how are you sustaining what you have built? Not only assets, career, or status, but relationships, trust, and example. A man can be professionally admired and still fail humanly. Integration prevents that rupture. This phase requires maturity. It is not a time for grand speeches or impulsive radical changes. It is a time for inner adjustment, for reviewing rhythms, expectations, and priorities, for recognizing that growing inward is just as necessary as growing outward. A whole man does not abandon responsibilities. He assumes them with greater awareness. When this call is answered, something changes quietly. Emptiness loses strength because it gains function. It stops being absence and becomes a space for reorganization. A man begins to align strength with presence, ambition with care, and authority with service. This alignment is not immediate, but it prepares the ground for something essential, concrete actions that turn reflection into daily practice. From here on, the path stops being merely understood and begins to be lived. Emptiness is not resolved by running faster. It is transformed when a man takes practical responsibility for his own life. Not abstract responsibility, nor future promises, but small, repeated, conscious choices. What follows are 5 strategies that are simple to understand and difficult to sustain because they require daily presence. None promise shortcuts. All require consistency. Strategy 1. Rebuild silence consciously. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of unnecessary stimulus. In a world that demands constant reaction, silence restores alignment. Set aside a few minutes every day without screens, tasks, or consumption. At first, the mind protests. Disordered thoughts appear. That is expected. Silence does not create chaos. It simply reveals what was already there. Aristotle reminded us that virtue is born of habit. Practice silence becomes practice clarity. Start simply. Sit upright for 5 minutes, close your eyes, and observe your thoughts without interference. That's it. No correcting, no judging. Strategy 2. Establish clear inner limits. Limits are not weakness. They are protection of energy. Decide on closing times, real breaks, and non-negotiable priorities. Many men say yes out of fear of conflict and later harvest resentment. Seneca warned that desires without governance enslave. Limits govern desire and preserve strength for what matters. Reflect honestly, in which situations do you never say no? And what has that cost your presence, your mood, and your relationships? Strategy 3. Redefine success using human criteria. External results matter, but they are insufficient. Add internal criteria: health, presence, stable relationships, and honest rest. Ask yourself often whether your current success is improving your life or merely filling your days. Solomon taught that wisdom measures consequences, not just immediate gains. Defining what success means to you prevents you from chasing metrics that do not nourish your inner life. Strategy 4. Practice real presence at work and at home. To be present is to be whole. At work, do one thing at a time. At home, listen without correcting. Full attention reduces silent conflicts. Cal Newport shows that deep focus reduces exhaustion. Consistent presence builds invisible, lasting trust. Be present with yourself as well. At the end of the day, review your actions. Were they conscious choices or automatic reactions? This simple review increases clarity without guilt. Strategy 5. Build a living legacy, not just results. Legacy is not what you accumulate. It is what remains in people when you are absent. Be reliable, fair, and consistent. Small daily examples shape more than speeches. Responsibility toward oneself inevitably becomes responsibility toward everyone around you. These strategies do not eliminate emptiness overnight. They reorganize it. Emptiness loses strength when it finds direction. Integration requires patience. There will be setbacks, difficult days, and adjustments. Persisting is part of the process. The man who takes this path does not abandon ambition. He aligns it. He does not reject work. He humanizes it. He does not run from himself. He finds himself. Emptiness stops being a threat and becomes a marker of maturity. This is how reflection turns into practice, and practice becomes a livable life. This path also involves caring for the bonds that sustain a man. Parents age, siblings go through phases, friends silently carry their own emptiness. When a man organizes himself inside, he becomes a stable reference. He listens better, reacts with less aggression, and offers reliable presence. This does not solve every problem, but it reduces damage and expands care. Assuming relational responsibility means honoring commitments, asking for forgiveness when you fail, and sustaining limits with respect. These are small commitments that build trust over time. Practical wisdom, remembered by Aristotle and Solomon, appears in these simple, repeated choices. None of this requires perfection. It requires continuous intention. A man learns by walking, adjusting, and persisting. When he integrates work, family, and inner life, he creates a virtuous cycle. Emptiness does not disappear completely, but it no longer commands. It becomes an indicator, not an enemy. In this way, the man of the 21st century builds a life that is firm, useful, and human, capable of sustaining achievements without losing himself and without harming those who walk beside him. If this video put into words something you feel but never knew how to explain, then it has done its job. Emptiness is not the end of the road. It is the point where a man stops merely functioning and begins to integrate. If you want to continue this journey with clarity, responsibility, and depth, subscribe to the channel. Here we don't talk about shortcuts. We talk about building a life that is strong on the outside and livable on the inside. Write in the comments, in which area of your life does everything work, but something still feels missing?